Welcome back to the Fourth Way Podcast. Purity of heart is to will one thing. Chapter 4. Barriers to willing one thing. The reward disease. If it be possible for a man really in truth to will one thing, then he must will the good in truth. If it be possible for a man to will the good in truth, then he must be at one with himself in willing to renounce all double-mindedness. Therefore, if it be possible for a man to will one thing, then he must will the good, for only the good is one. Thus, if it becomes a fact that he wills one thing, he must will the good in truth. Oh, that one might be able at this point to speak rightly, for at this point, what the talk is concerned with is the life that most men lead. They desire the good, and yet the world is still so filled with double-mindedness. Here, too, the speaker has his own life, his own frailties, his own share of doubleness of mind. Oh, that the talk might not seem to wish to judge or accuse others. For to wish to judge others instead of oneself would also be double-mindedness. Oh, that the talk might not seem to press demands that are binding upon others, but that exempt the speaker, as if he had only the task of talking. For this, too, is double-mindedness, just as it is hidden pride to wish to offer comfort to others, but not to be willing to let oneself be comforted. No matter how adroitly, by means of a sad or cheerful mood, he knows how in sympathy to console others, if at the same time he believes that for himself there is no consolation, this is hidden pride, and so double-mindedness. Oh, that one might wound no one except to his healing, that the talk might embitter no one, and yet be the truth, that the talk along with truth might be sufficiently penetrating to reveal that which is hidden. Oh, that the talk might wipe out double-mindedness and win hearts for the good, yet not by persuasion, for this also readily becomes double-minded, to wish to enjoy the pleasure of persuading, to treasure the longing for it, to quiet oneself by it, and thereby forget what is to be done. Oh, that the talk might repel the listeners from the speaker and attract them only to the good. In the first place, a statement must be made which is easy to grasp, that the man who desires the good for the sake of the reward does not will one thing, but is double-minded. The good is one thing. The reward is another that may be present and may be absent for the time being, or until the very last. When he then wills the good for the sake of the reward, he does not will one thing, but two. It is now certain that he will not in this way make much progress along the pathway of the good, for in truth, it is as if a man, instead of naturally using both eyes to see one thing, should use one eye to see one side, and the other eye to see the other side. This does not succeed. It only confuses sight. However, we are not speaking about this here, except to note that it is double-mindedness. In ancient times, this problem was also frequently an object of consideration. There were shameless teachers of impudence, who thought it right to do wrong on a large scale and then to make it appear as if one willed the good. In this way, they thought one had a double advantage: the pitiful advantage of being able to do wrong, to be able to get one's own way, to let one's passions rage, and the hypocritical advantage of seeming to be good. But in ancient times, there was also a simple sage whose simplicity became a snare for the impudent one's sophistry. He taught that in order really to be certain that it was the good that men willed, one ought even to shun seeming good, presumably in order that the reward should not become tempting. For so different is the good and the reward, when the reward is separately striven after, that the good is the ennobling and the sanctifying, the reward is the tempting. But the tempting is never the good. This reward that we are talking about here is the world's reward, for the reward which God for eternity has joined with the good has nothing bad in it. It is also quite certain. Neither things present nor things to come, nor height nor depth can separate it from the good. Angels cannot will such separation, and all the devils are not strong enough to accomplish it. But if the world itself is not good in its innermost being, if, as the Scriptures say, it still lieth in wickedness, or if it is far from being as one for whom it is a rare exception not to will the good, if this be so, then earthly reward is of a doubtful character, and hence it is all the more likely that the world will reward what it takes for the good, what to a certain degree resembles the good, what as those impudent ones taught has the good's appearance, and those impudent ones were not lacking in intimate knowledge of the world. Hence, reward is indeed that which tempts. The question is not difficult. If a man loves a girl for the sake of her money, who will call him a lover? He does not love the girl, but the money. He is not a lover, but a money seeker. But if a man said, "It is the girl I love, and she has money," and he should ask us for our judgment, for we have no particular call to judge, then a good answer would be, "It is a difficult matter with this money. Money may have a great influence one can easily be deceived by, and it is very difficult to know oneself. If he were really very intent on this matter, he could even wish that the money were not there, just to test his love. For a true lover would say, 'The girl has only one fault. She has money.' And what now may the girl say? If she said, 'The advantage I wish to have is that it is I that have made him rich,' I wonder if she could be called a real lover, for she did not really love him, but the money. If, on the contrary, the two in their love agreed to do a good act with this money, which was a hindrance to them, then it would be made possible for them to desire love alone. Let us hope that no one would set about to disturb the innocent fancy of this beautiful thought by telling us, 'What life will surely teach that pair?' Alas, there is a wretched knowledge, a shabby acquaintance with the real, that is not merely wretched and shabby, but also, on all occasions, puts on an important front. As though that knowledge were anything but infamy in any person who in a cowardly and traitorous and envious and empty puffed-up manner dares to make such a comment. As if that knowledge were other than contemptible double-mindedness that both wills and does not will, and therefore will only lie about the good, and lie about the man who is good. Yes, what was once said of memory is applicable to that sort of knowledge, namely that one might prefer to learn the art of forgetting. Indeed, it is easy enough for one to become schooled in that sort of knowledge. It may be learned readily enough from all the wretched ones, so that one might rather wish and pray that there was an art that one could learn that would teach him to remain ignorant of such knowledge. Now, about desiring the girl without the money. Let us consider the good, where all is on a more perfect plane, where earnestness and truth are the innocent fancy of beautiful thought. To will the good for the sake of reward is double-mindedness. To will one thing is, therefore, to will the good without considering the reward. In truth, to will one thing is to will the good, but not, therefore, to desire reward in the world. The reward can, of course, come without a man's willing it. Even though it is in the outward realms, the reward may come from God. But when a man considers that all reward in the outer realm can become what the world's reward always is, a temptation for him, then he must guard himself even against true reward, just in order rightly to be able to will the good. Oh, that he might not forget that this, even such a desire to guard himself, may once more be a temptation to pride. But if it be true of the reward for good in the world, that the reward the world gives is so dangerous, then the good is almost an edifying quality here in this world, even if this edification is somewhat softened in the blessed smile of eternity. For here the man who, in truth, wills the good, by willing one thing, is very rarely led into the difficulty of being tempted by reward. Now that the good has its own reward is indeed forever certain. There's nothing so certain. It is not even more certain that God exists, for that is one and the same thing. But here on earth, good is often temporarily rewarded by ingratitude, by lack of appreciation, by poverty, by contempt, by many sufferings, and now and then by death. It is not this reward to which we refer when we say that the good has its reward. Yet this is the reward that comes in the external world, and that comes first of all. And it is precisely this reward which the man is anxious about, who wills the good for the sake of the reward. For he has no time to wait, no time, no years, no life to give away for an eternity. Hence that reward which comes in the external world is so far from being desirable that, on the contrary, it is both valuable and encouraging when it does not come in the outer world, so that the double-mindedness in the inner realm may perish, and so that the reward in heaven may be all the greater. To will the good for the sake of the reward is, as it were, a symbol of double-mindedness, and a double-minded man, according to the Apostle James's words, is unsteady in all his ways, nor does he accomplish anything. For a double-minded man, says the same apostle, may not expect to receive that for which he prays. Even if such a double-minded one, who wills the good for the sake of the reward, may puff himself up, appear defiant, and fancy that he has won his goal, even if many blind ones foolishly think the same, yet let us not deceive each other, my listener, or allow a sense deception to do so. It is quite possible that he will win good things that are called reward. Still, he does not get them as reward, at least not in truth, if it be true that to will the good in truth is recognizable by one's willing it without reward. O thou the good's wonderful at oneness with thyself that protects thee from being deceived, when for the sake of the reward a double-minded person only pretends to will the good, and he seems to get the reward, nevertheless he does not get it. For that which he gets, he does not get as reward for the good. So far is he from getting it as reward that rather at the very moment that he receives the good, he discovers that the reward has vanished. Look at the girl who has money. A false lover can perhaps deceive her, so that it appears as if he loved her, although what he really loves is the money. She may joyfully, perhaps even gratefully, continue to live in the fantasy that she is loved. But no one can deceive the good. Nay, not in all eternity. Not in all eternity. Yes, it is just there that one has the least chance of deceiving it. Perhaps here on earth it can be accomplished. Not that the good is deceived, but men may be deceived by the likeness of the good. Such does not escape the attention of the good. From time to time it focuses its wrath on such a man and reveals his deception. But often the good lets the deceiver go his way because the good knows, in itself, that it is the stronger. Only a weak and effeminate man demands immediate justification, demands immediate success in the outer world, just because he is weak, and therefore must have an outward proof that he is the strongest. The one who is really strong and is really the more powerful quietly concedes a domain to the weakling and readily allows him to give the impression of being the stronger. So with the good, when it tolerates such a deceiver, it is as if it said to him secretly, "Yes, enjoy yourself with your false appearance, but remember, we shall talk together again." The double-minded one stands at a parting of the ways. Two visions appear, the good and the reward. It is not in his power to bring them into agreement, for they are fundamentally different from each other. Only that reward which God for all eternity adds to the good in the inner realm, only that is in truth homogeneous with the good. So he stands pondering and reflecting. If he is wholly absorbed in his pondering, then he continues to stand, a symbol of double-mindedness. But suppose he should tear himself free from the deliberation and should now go forward. Along which way? Do not ask him about that. Perhaps he is able to answer learned questions and to betray extensive knowledge. But one thing he cannot do, one and only one thing he is not able to do. He cannot answer the question about which of the two ways he is taking. By repeated thoughtful pondering in an attempt to see the heterogeneous together, he has somewhat confused his sight. He believes he has found that there is a third way, and that it is this third way along which he is going. This third way has no name, for it does not really exist, and so it is obvious that he, if he is sincere, cannot say which way he is taking. If he is sincere, for otherwise he would indeed declare that he is going along the way of the good. It may even be important to convince men of that, in order that they may honor him, for honor belongs to the reward which he is seeking after. The third way is the secret which he keeps to himself. And now how does he go along this third way, which is narrower than any rope dancer's rope, for it simply does not exist? Does he go steadily and firmly, like one that has a definite goal before his eyes, like one that scarcely looks at anything around him in order not to be disturbed, like one that looks for one thing alone, for the goal? No, only a person upon the path of the good walks in this fashion, with only the good before his eyes. Does he, then, go like the one that is hunting for every sensation along the broad way of pleasure? No, that he does not do. Does he go like a carefree youth who light-heartedly lets his gaze wander over everything about him on his way? Alas, he is too old for that. How does he go, then? He walks so slowly under the circumstances because of the difficulty of the way. He feels his way forward with his foot, and as he finally plants his foot and takes a step, he immediately looks about at the clouds, notes the way the wind blows, and whether the smoke goes straight up from the chimney. It is, namely, the reward, earth's reward, that he is looking for. And that reward is like the clouds, and like the wind, and like the smoke of the chimney. And so he asks his way continually. He gives minute attention to the faces of the passing people in order to learn how the reward stands, what the prices are, what demands the time and the people would place upon the good if they were to give the reward. What is he really after? Nay, do not ask him about that. Perhaps he would be able to answer every other question with the exception of that one about the way. But this question he cannot answer in definite terms, if he is to answer it sincerely, for the reason that the answer is all too readily at hand, that he wills the good and detests vice, when vice seems to be loathsome, that he wills the approbation of good people, when they are in the majority and possess the power, that he will benefit the good cause, when it is so good as to confer some advantage upon him. Yet in sincerity he dares not say definitely what he wills. He dares not say loudly and decisively with the full voice of conviction that he wills the good. He utters it with the dull caution of double-mindedness, for he knows well enough that the good and the reward are not rationed out together. Let us assume that by such a careless utterance the good and the reward came into conflict, and let us assume that he be considered as willing the good in this manner. Now suppose that the reward is missing, which has previously happened in this world. What would he do then? Would he will the good and even be willing to forego the appearance of willing the good? No, definitely not. Does he then will the reward? Yes, but he will not plainly admit it. Does he then will the good? Yes, now and then, perhaps for decency's sake, as it is called. He pretends, therefore, to will the good, for the sake of honor and reward. As a matter of fact, he does occasionally will the good, to save his face. This is what happens to the man who hankers after a reward. He is so double-minded that one hardly knows whether to laugh or to weep over him, if one does not know that all double-mindedness is destruction. But if one knows this, he knows well enough what to do, especially when he has his own share of this double-mindedness. Now this matter of willing the good for the sake of reward may take a somewhat different form. Perhaps there was a man who really in all sincerity willed the good. Humbly before God, and quickened in his enthusiasm, he cheerfully understood when the world and when men worked against him. He cheerfully understood that this opposition was the reward, and that there was nothing further to be said about it. Strengthened by God, bracing himself only by his confidence, he almost never desired to be rewarded in any other way by this world. But then he became weary. He clutched after the reward in the narrower sense, and after an easier understanding of the reward. For in general, the closer the understanding lies to misunderstanding, the easier it becomes. He could not bear with the eternal. He could not endure the opposition of the world and of the people. So first he claimed the reward, under the interpretation that there ought to be an agreement between the good and the world. Finally, he demanded the reward alone. In this fashion, he slipped backwards. O sad end to a good beginning! O thou the good stern zeal for thyself, that thou perhaps permittest him to get the reward in the world just when thou hast rejected him, that thou lettest him get the reward of the world while he has ungratefully forgotten what a blessedness it is to have thy reward, while earth withholds her reward from him. Or he did not begin so high, but simply with willing the good in truth, without knowledge of the world, without having conceived in his heart the possibility of what may happen to a man, he piously hoped that the good would not withhold its reward. Now understood in the light of eternity, this is an eternal and sacred truth. But in the sense of temporal existence, it is foolish and fruitless cleverness. So he went out into the school of experience, for we all go to school as long as we live. Life school is for adults, and therefore is somewhat more stern than the children's school, where the attentive and industrious ones come to the fore among those of the same age. So life took him in its stern school, but he resisted. He reduced his demands. He did not wish to deceive the good. Alas, neither would that help. He believed that as long as he clung to the good, he possessed a claim upon life. Now it seemed to him as though the good alone had claims upon him. At this his courage slackened. He looked about him where so many others helped themselves to the reward. The tempter began to frighten him into a feeling of faint-heartedness as to why he did not wish to be like the others, and as to why he insisted upon running after the vagaries of imagination instead of laying hold of that which is certain. Then his mind was changed. In life, it happened to him just as in school it might happen to the superior pupil, if there were no teacher. The mediocre would gain the dominance and gain power to seduce the superior pupils, because the good pupil had no teacher in whom to seek protection. And in life there is no visible teacher who encourages the good pupil, for we are all pupils. If the good pupil keeps on, he must find the encouragement in himself. This he did not find. His courage was shattered. Perhaps he did not find what he now sought in the world. And so he went down, he the deceived one, whom the world deceived as to the reward, when he willed the good, and whom the world betrayed most terribly, when it got him to forsake the good. It's been a while since I read this from Kierkegaard, and so I don't remember what exactly my favorite part is, but I think this chapter is probably my favorite chapter, or at least one of the top ones for me. And a part of that, I think, is because I have I wouldn't say an infatuation, because, that makes it sound like it's, an undue, like it's disproportionate, sort of. But I really like the idea of consequentialism, because I think it's so prevalent. I don't think I have a disproportionate focus on it. I think it's just, it runs the world. It runs a lot of Christian moral ethics. It's such a big deal. And in this chapter, so much of what Kierkegaard talks about, like when I think of some of the quotes that I have highlighted here, which if you go to my Goodreads, it has my Kindle highlights and stuff. And actually in this chapter, I was noting as I was going through, there's a lot of stuff that I'm like, oh, I should highlight this, and I should highlight that, and I should highlight this. And like I would have the whole chapter highlighted, because there's so much. So actually I don't have a lot of this chapter highlighted because it's It's just so much of it is profound. Because so much of what Kierkegaard is saying is exactly what I see in my Christian community. This calling evil good because of what it produces, because of this reward that Kierkegaard talks about. And so in this chapter, Kierkegaard's going through various ideas of how the good can be subverted, like how ourselves, the world, temptations, whatever, can get us to be double-minded, which in turn means that we're not really, really seeking the good. And so in this chapter, he calls this the reward disease. So this idea that the reward, the promise of a reward, is what corrupts us into being double-minded and not truly seeking the good. And he highlights various ways that kind of clicked in my mind of just how people fool themselves, and they say, "Oh yes, I am doing good because we are seeking a godly nation, or we are trying to curb immorality, or we are whatever you're trying to do." They are looking at the reward rather than seeking the good. And Kierkegaard talks about how the reward, the true reward, the eternal reward, comes over time through endurance. Sometimes you don't even get to see it. And oftentimes what you do when you are single-mindedly pursuing the good, you get rewards like death, suffering, right? Isolation, loneliness. You get those sorts of things because you are not going with the crowd. And Kierkegaard, in some of his other works, is very big about talking about the idea of the crowd and how it's antithetical to Christianity. Not discipleship, not community, but a crowd, a mass following is something that is antithetical to Christianity, because you yourself need to choose to follow. And you do that in community, yes, but that's different than crowd mentality. So as always, Kierkegaard has some analogies, and I think the one that stands out the best here is, this guy who is, he sees this girl and he's like, "Oh, I think I love her, but she's rich." It's like, well, do you love her because you really love her, or do you love her because of her money? And even if you think you don't love her, if you truly, truly think you don't love her for her money, you might be self-deceived, because we deceive ourselves all the time. Like you're not really, really going to know. And that's something you're only going to learn over time as your heart is truly exposed. You're only going to learn if the money goes away, right? One of those two things has to happen. You learn over time, or you learn when the reward, this thing that you're getting, goes away. And then hey, you know what? I was in it for her, not for this reward of being wealthy. And similar with the good. So going back to the political example where we see so much consequentialism, a lot of Christians are seeking political power, right? It's like, okay, are you seeking to be faithful to God because you really, really want good for your country, good for your people, you really want to follow God, you want to be faithful? Okay, then why are you willing to compromise? Oh, for this thing that you say is good. Okay. What happens if you don't get that? What happens if you do get that? If you don't get that, do you walk away? Do you resort to dirty tactics? If you do get that, what do you do with the power that you have? Do you choose to love? Do you choose to build community? Like, what are you going to do with that? And I think this is one of those things that a lot of Christians are fooling themselves into thinking that they want all of this political power to do good with. I think what's going to happen is you're going to see, as they either don't get that reward, they lose power, you're going to see more and more of evil come out of them. And if they do get the power, right, they do get this reward, you're going to see that their definition of good changes, because they're going to use that power, that reward, for things that are not very good. You're going to see their true face, if you aren't seeing that already. Power is a very big dynamic in the evangelical church at the moment. In our society, of course, it always has been. But in the evangelical churches, we've had a taste of power coming up through the religious, the moral majority and all of that stuff. And just all the power that Christianity has had in our culture. And as we're starting to lose that, and as we're trying to regain that, it seems like power is a very big theme at this point. There are lots of books. The Way of the Dragon, Way of the Lamb was one. There are a bunch of other books that have been written about just the power mongering inside of the church. So it's bubbling over and over, and I think you should reread or re-listen to Kierkegaard's chapter 4 of this work, because when you read it in light of what's going on and how people are acting, it makes so much sense here. How this is double-mindedness. It is not Christianity. It's not morality. It's not eternal-mindedness. It's not kingdom-mindedness. It's evil. It's double-mindedness. Now, Kierkegaard doesn't let people get off too easy, though, because he also talks about somebody at the end of the chapter who, is on the path to the good. And I think at this point, I would identify more with this person. And this person isn't better. They have a pitfall at a different area, right? So he says essentially that we need to beware of the reward, as it can become a temptation to us. And if you're like, ooh, well, I'm not seeking after the reward. I'm being faithful. I'm calling out people who are seeking the reward and telling them to be faithful. Like, look at me. I'm not seeking the reward. He's like, yeah, when you do that, the reward for you is, this perceived integrity, this perceived pride, betterness than other people, which leads to pride. And it's like, well, that's your reward. So, okay, I put power to the side, but do I have pride? Thinking, I'm better than the Doug Wilson crowd. I'm better than, all of those people who just are engaged in political idolatry and view President Trump in messianic terms. I'm better than them. No, I am just bad in a different way. I am double-minded in a different way. And we all have our proclivities towards those kinds of things. Like there are different rewards that the world can offer, and some of them look more eternal than others. For me, political power, that looks like a cheap, like Chinese lead-laden toy. Like, I don't want that. That's like, who are you guys fooling yourself? That's worthless. Why are you compromising yourself for that? But to me, integrity and speaking out and all, that looks like the eternal. Then sure, yeah, like integrity is an eternal sort of thing. But when it's wielded as something not to build up community or to love other people, but as a notch in my belt, it's like, well, all of a sudden it's not integrity. It's not eternal. It's that cheap, lead-laden, Chinese-made toy that you get at the dollar store. And likewise, for those who are committing political idolatry, there are great and wonderful things that governments can do and have done, and there will be some good things that Christians with power are able to do. And so there are eternal aspects in most routes, and the issue is that we kind of we hold that one facet towards us, the eternal facet that we see, while there are other facets that we have on that same diamond that are impurities and such. And so I think, if I can throw my own analogy in here, I think Kierkegaard would take this diamond analogy maybe and say, hey, look, the issue is our basking in the reward now. It's great when there's a reward in this earthly time. Sometimes that's from the world, like sometimes it's natural, like when you do good things, people just might notice it, and it might get you some kind of credit. It might get you some kind of reward down here. And sometimes that might even be a blessing from God. Like God might give that to you. But when you get that diamond, when you find that nice, beautiful, shiny facet, the trap is taking that and staring at it like Golem, like Smeagol, where you look at the shine, and now all of a sudden you're enraptured by it, and that's all you see. It's like, no, that's the reward becoming a temptation for you and a trip for you. Like, put the reward to the side. Don't bask in the reward. You keep your eyes straight ahead on the goal, on the eternal. And like, rewards might come your way, but that's not what you're basking in. You're continuing to look ahead. Another analogy, it's sort of like when I played baseball forever ago, they would always tell you, like, when you hit the ball, you're not looking, like you have base coaches and stuff at younger levels. I know that in the major leagues, they probably look more, but they're like, don't look for the ball. Like you don't hit the ball and then stop and look where it goes. And even while you're running, you're not usually trying to stare down the ball and look at it, especially if you hit a ground ball to the infield. Your job is to look straight ahead at first base and run as hard as you can. Your base coach will tell you to go. Your base coach will tell you to stop. You'll get indications on whether you can look away for a second or not, or if you need to slide or run, whatever it is you need to do. You don't usually slide into first, but anyway, it's kind of like that. And, if you get a good hit, that's a great reward, but don't stand there looking at the hit, because if you never make it to first base, you're going to get thrown out even if your hit was good. And if you don't get to first base, you're not going to get to second. If you don't get to second, you're not going to get to third. If you don't get to third, you're not going to make it home and score. And so I think that's what this chapter is about. It's keeping your eyes straight ahead on the goal, even when good things come your way. Don't let that reward become a disease for you. So hopefully you enjoyed this chapter. Like I said, it is worth reading and rereading and listening to again. So have at it.
That's all for now. So peace, and because I'm a pacifist, when I say it, I mean it. This podcast is a part of the Kingdom Outpost Network. Please check out the links below to find other great podcasts and content related to nonviolence and kingdom living.